Question 3. If you're up for a read on Brexit, can you read this article and summarize it, stating the pros and cons separately and your point of view in 500 words? Take a look at it quick. I think what I might do is just summarize over here what our junior tutor has written and add any insight that I may think is useful. Yeah, this is a very long article. I already read one very long article. So I think I'm going to do what I said there. I'll list the pros, add anything that I think might be important, although this does look pretty thorough. I'll list the cons and do the same thing. And then we can move forward because I only have half an hour or so left. So the pros. According to the article, Brexit, what are the pros and cons of leaving the EU? There are many pros and cons of Brexit, which have been mentioned below. Pros, A, it's going to be savings in money. Just 1 second. Yeah, I'm streaming, Dad. Can't talk, sorry. So what our junior tutor has written. There was the argument that leaving the European Union would result in immediate cost savings, as the country won't have to pay any membership fees to the European Union, which was much higher than the advantages received by the country in free trade and in other investments. So essentially, they no longer have to pay membership fees if they're no longer part of the European Union. I believe it falls on the taxpayer to pay those fees. That's how they raise the money for it. So we've got sovereignty. Honestly, not even sure if I pronounced that correctly, but give it the good old college try. Sovereignty. Great Britain will have more power to deal with trade issues with other countries that it has not been able to do as an EU member. It would be freer to enter into its own trade agreements. So basically the European Union, which is made up of all these different countries in Europe, can enter into trade agreements and negotiate with other countries as one entity. Of course, when you're made up of all these different countries, probably not every country in the European Union, it's probably not beneficial, whatever trade agreement they enter, for every single country, but it will be beneficial for the European Union as a whole. So if you are just acting on your own as a solo country, you can do what's in the best interest of your country specifically instead of the European Union as a whole. Now the pro is immigration check. People in the EU member countries have the freedom to move from their own place and live in any part of their member countries that have prevented Britain from regulating immigration. After Brexit, Britain will have control over its borders and check immigrants from entering the country. Because basically, if you're a member of the European Union, you can pretty much up and leave to any other country within the European Union without going through the typical process of immigration, etc. Yeah. D, jobs. This is kind of tied hand in hand with the immigration. If there's less immigration, that means, and if jobs were to stay constant and less new people are coming into the country, by definition, that means that there are more jobs going to be available by the people that are already living there. So for the already People that are already citizens of Britain can be a good thing. Security. Brexit will allow Britain to control threats of anti-democratic policies against the country and its people. As there was free movement of people among the member countries of the EU, there's always the chance of terrorist attacks and violence, which endanger the lives of its people and the country. Kind of goes hand in hand with the jobs and immigration that we just talked about, so I will leave that at that. And lastly is power. Brexit would make it possible for Britain to emerge as a more powerful nation by re-establishing the country on its own. Besides, it would be able to make connections with other parts of the world. Again, if they're no longer a part of the European Union, they have more individuality as a country and can negotiate deals on their own terms instead of on the terms of the Union. Cons, on the other hand, downfall in the economy. Brexit would result in Britain to face a loss of 2.2% of its total GDP by 2030 due to cutting back all ties with the EU, which in turn will diminish all the economic linkings of Britain with the member countries of the EU and other parts of the world. In short, Brexit is very expensive if it's to go through. A lack of investment. That's just hideous. Of investment. Many banks and investment firms have moved from Britain to some other EU countries in the post-Brexit period, as these investors have lost their free passports across the continent. The revenues earned by Britain from these firms would have been lost as a result of their shift from the country. I don't know the exact tax implications of Brexit for companies that were working there in the past, but it sounds like it may have been possible that Brexit has made it a worse tax situation for them, in which case they will likely pull out of Brexit and relocate their companies elsewhere. Pull out of Britain, I should say. Problem of British people to move freely in the continent, I will call that mobility. Check-in immigrants from Britain after Brexit would make the British people living in other parts of the continent to return to their homeland, as they would lose the advantage of free and easy accessibility to the EU member countries. So those that identify as British citizens that have been living in other parts of the EU would either need to return home or pay fees. So it's likely they're not super excited about Brexit. Jobs as both a pro and a con. Amazing. Con side of jobs. Many people could lose their jobs after Brexit due to the cutting back of all ties with the EU if trade and investment will not grow as before. So earlier when we talked about the lack of investment, if companies are pulling out of Britain, that means that jobs are being pulled out of Britain as well. So if some investment company, for example, pulls its offices out of Britain and they had 500 British people working there, they're now out of a job. Or they need to follow the company to wherever they're moving. Decrease in the labor supply. This will be because people cannot move freely within Britain as part of the EU anymore. Controlling immigrants by Britain would result in a loss of labor force and skilled workers from other parts of the world, which would negatively affect the growth of industries and firms and impact its economy. I think that sums it all up. Closing statements were if Britain maintains a cordial relationship after the Brexit with the EU, It would serve good for the prosperity of Britain, as there are many strong members in the EU, like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, etc. I think those are all G20 countries, who pose a stronghold to the world economy. Although Britain has decided to rebuild its economy on its own, many economists point out that the economy of the country would fall and damage Britain's outlook. Many analyses have been generated on Britain's loss and gains on Brexit. The cost of Britain to redevelop its trade agreements and bilateral ties with other partners will be initially very high, so we have to build everything from its inception, which might also affect the business of its partners also. But since the country has a rich heritage from the beginning, it would not be much harder for it to emerge as a strong nation. Brexit is a heavily debated topic. If you're interested in it, I'd recommend reading this article and many others and forming your own point of view on it. That was a very good summary by our junior tutor.